Jonathan Miller sat in his office, gazing out the window at the city of New York, but his mind was elsewhere. He had built an empire, amassed billions, but there was a void that no wealth could ever fill. His daughter, Lily, had vanished without a trace 5 years ago. The memory haunted him, her laugh, her innocence, and the last time he saw her wearing a small silver necklace with a delicate heart pendant. It was his final gift to her. Since that day, he had become relentless, dedicating his life and fortune to finding missing children, hoping to bring families the closure he never received. Inside his sleek, modern office, a knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Marcus, his trusted assistant, who entered with a concerned expression. "Mr. Miller," Marcus began cautiously, "we have a new caregiver joining the Foundation's Rehabilitation Center today. Her name is Jennifer Hayes." Jonathan barely registered the name as Marcus continued. "She comes highly recommended." Jonathan nodded absently, his mind returning to the familiar anguish. His foundation had helped find and rescue dozens of children, yet Lily's whereabouts remained a mystery. "Let me know if there's anything unusual about her," Jonathan replied in his usual brusque tone. Marcus hesitated before stepping back, sensing the lingering tension in the air. Meanwhile, at the rehabilitation center, Jennifer Hayes was getting familiar with her new environment. She was excited yet apprehensive about the new job. Her background had not been easy. Raised by her grandmother, she never knew her parents. Yet she had managed to make something of herself, driven by a strong will to help others. As she walked through the corridors of the facility, Jennifer noticed the walls adorned with pictures of rescued children, their smiling faces contrasting the grim reality of their pasts. It was then that Jonathan arrived unannounced for an inspection, moving through the center like a ghost, barely acknowledging anyone. When his gaze briefly met Jennifer's, there was an inexplicable moment of recognition that neither of them could place. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly as he observed her. Something about Jennifer struck him as familiar, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He was used to the tormenting tricks of his own mind. Before leaving, he approached Jennifer, offering a curt greeting. "Welcome to the team," he said simply, his voice devoid of warmth. "I hope you find this work fulfilling." Jennifer, sensing the weight of his presence, replied, "Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm here to make a difference." He nodded, then turned away, his thoughts already consumed by the past once more. Back in his private study later that evening, Jonathan found himself staring at an old photo of Lily. His eyes settled on the necklace she wore, a symbol of both hope and failure. He had dedicated everything to bringing other children back, yet his own daughter's fate remained an agonizing mystery. The only thing that kept him going was the faint, cruel hope that one day, against all odds, he might still find her. It was a busy afternoon at the rehabilitation center. Jennifer was in the middle of preparing a group activity when she felt an unexpected chill. She reached up to adjust the necklace around her neck, a delicate, silver heart pendant she had worn for as long as she could remember. It had been a gift from her grandmother, a keepsake from a past cloaked in unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Jonathan had decided to conduct a surprise visit to the center. He believed that showing up unexpectedly kept the staff alert, but today his visit had a personal purpose. He wanted to learn more about the newly hired caregiver. As he made his way down the hallway, he spotted Jennifer guiding a group of children through a painting session. She was patient, kind, and genuinely engaged, traits Jonathan respected, even admired, in others. He was about to leave quietly when something caught his eye. The pendant. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the small, silver heart swing gently around Jennifer's neck. His mind raced back to the countless photographs of Lily wearing that same necklace. It was a unique piece, custom-made, one he had never seen anywhere else until now. Summoning a calmness that belied the storm inside him, Jonathan approached Jennifer. "That's an interesting necklace," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice was tight, and his eyes betrayed a deeper interest. Jennifer, taken aback by the sudden question, instinctively reached up to touch the pendant. "Oh, this? It was a gift from my grandmother. She gave it to me when I was little." Her smile was warm, yet there was an undercurrent of uncertainty, as if she sensed that the necklace held more significance than she had always believed. Jonathan's heart raced, his mind buzzing with a mix of hope and dread. "It's beautiful," he managed, his voice low. "Did she ever tell you where she got it?" Jennifer hesitated, her eyes dropping for a moment before she met his gaze again. "Not really. My grandmother was always a bit vague about it. She said it was just a family keepsake, something passed down, but she never shared much about its origin." Jonathan's thoughts spun out of control, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Family keepsakes can hold a lot of memories," he said, trying to extract more information without revealing his suspicions. "Do you know anything about your parents? Did they ever mention this necklace?" Jennifer shook her head slowly, a touch of sadness in her eyes. "No, I don't know my parents. I was raised by my grandmother. She's the only family I've ever known." She paused, then added, almost apologetically, "I wish I had more to share, but that's all I know." Jonathan's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Could this be just a coincidence? Or was it a long-awaited sign? A tiny thread of hope leading him back to Lily? He felt a strange mix of desperation and excitement. He had to find out more, but he couldn't rush it. This woman, Jennifer, might be completely unrelated to Lily's disappearance. Still, he couldn't ignore the fact that the necklace was identical, and that was enough to awaken his dormant hope, a hope he thought had been extinguished long ago. Later that night, back at his penthouse, Jonathan poured himself a drink. He stared out at the city lights, his mind replaying the moment he saw the necklace. Could it really be the same one? Could Jennifer somehow be linked to his daughter's disappearance? He had to know more about her past. His instincts told him that this was no ordinary coincidence. It was a lead, perhaps the only real one he had encountered in years. He dialed Marcus's number. "I need everything you can find on Jennifer Hayes," he said, his voice more determined than ever. "Where she's from, her family history, everything. And be discreet. I don't want her knowing about this." Marcus, familiar with Jonathan's tone, understood the urgency. "I'll start right away," he replied before hanging up. As he sat back down, Jonathan couldn't shake off the image of the silver pendant around Jennifer's neck. It was as if fate had handed him a cruel gift, something that might unravel the mystery of his missing daughter, or plunge him further into despair. Jennifer, meanwhile, was unaware of the storm brewing around her. Back at her small apartment, she thought about the brief encounter with Jonathan. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at the necklace, a look she couldn't quite understand. But then, she brushed the feeling aside, attributing it to her own imagination. Jonathan's determination grew stronger with each passing moment. This wasn't just about the pendant anymore. It was about finding Lily, and Jennifer was now at the center of his quest. Jonathan's investigation began the very next morning. Marcus arrived at his office, folders in hand, having spent the night collecting every bit of information he could find on Jennifer Hayes. He placed the files on Jonathan's desk, his expression revealing both exhaustion and concern. "This is everything we have on her so far," Marcus said. "There are a few things you might find interesting." Jonathan wasted no time. He flipped open the top folder and scanned the contents quickly. Jennifer had been adopted as a child, with the adoption records indicating she had been found abandoned near a small town in Pennsylvania. Her adoptive grandmother, an elderly woman named Alice Hayes, had raised her alone, keeping Jennifer's origins largely a secret. As Jonathan read further, he noticed a peculiar detail. Alice had been evasive about the circumstances under which she found Jennifer. She had always insisted that it was better not to dwell on the past, claiming she had given Jennifer a good life and that was all that mattered. Jonathan's suspicions deepened. He knew there were gaps in Jennifer's history that needed to be filled. "Do we have any information on her birth parents?" Jonathan asked, his tone sharp with impatience. Marcus shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. The records are either sealed or missing entirely. It's like someone didn't want them found." Jonathan's eyes darkened. "This can't be a coincidence," he muttered. The parallels with Lily's disappearance were too striking to ignore. Both cases involved a child found abandoned, no clear family history, and now the identical necklace. As the day unfolded, Jonathan wrestled with how to approach Jennifer. He knew he couldn't confront her directly. She had to trust him before revealing anything further. For now, he decided to play it cautiously, using subtlety and patience. He needed to get closer, to see if she would open up about her past on her own. The opportunity came a few days later, during a routine event at the rehabilitation center. Jonathan attended the gathering, knowing Jennifer would be there. He observed her quietly, noting her interactions with the children. She was warm and natural, genuinely invested in their well-being. For a moment, a strange thought flickered through Jonathan's mind. Could this woman, who might be connected to his lost daughter, have experienced the same kindness Lily once had? After the event, as the staff began to clear up, Jonathan approached Jennifer again. "I've been meaning to ask you," he said, trying to sound casual. "How did you get involved in this kind of work?" Jennifer looked up, surprised by his interest. "I've always wanted to help children," she answered simply. "Growing up, I didn't have many people around, so I know what it's like to feel lost or alone. I just want to give these kids a chance at something better." Jonathan studied her expression, searching for any hint of hesitation. He saw only sincerity, but he couldn't help pushing a little further. "Your grandmother must be proud of the work you're doing," he added, watching her reaction closely. Jennifer's face softened at the mention of Alice. "She is," she replied. "She's always encouraged me to follow my heart, even if it meant going down an uncertain path. She's been my rock." Jonathan nodded, trying to mask the urgency in his voice. "I'd like to meet her someday," he said, almost as an afterthought. Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, a trace of uncertainty appearing in her eyes. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said slowly. "My grandmother, she's not very open with strangers. She's had a hard life and prefers to stay private." The reluctance in Jennifer's response only fueled Jonathan's determination. He had to find a way to meet Alice, to uncover what she might be hiding. But he knew he couldn't force it. Instead, he would have to wait for the right moment, a moment when Jennifer's guard might be down. Meanwhile, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something about Jonathan's interest in her seemed off. While he appeared friendly, there was a deeper intensity beneath his words, as if he was searching for something she couldn't understand. She mentioned her concerns to a coworker, Carla, that evening. "I get the sense that he's curious about more than just my work," Jennifer admitted. Carla shrugged, not fully grasping the gravity of Jennifer's unease. "He's a billionaire who runs a foundation for missing children," she said with a dismissive wave. "Maybe he just wants to make sure you're committed." But Jennifer's instincts whispered otherwise. She couldn't tell if Jonathan's curiosity was a good sign or something to be wary of. She decided to keep her distance, at least for now. Jonathan, however, was anything but distant. That same evening, he drove to Alice's neighborhood, parking his car discreetly down the street. He needed to see the woman who had raised Jennifer. He needed answers. The small house was modest, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. As Jonathan watched from a distance, he saw a frail, elderly woman on the porch, her features blurred by the fading daylight. She sat quietly, staring into the street as if lost in her own thoughts. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He felt a deep, inexplicable connection to this moment, as if the truth were within reach. But he knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. He drove away, his mind racing with plans. He needed to speak to Alice, to hear her side of the story, and to learn whether Jennifer's past was linked to Lily's disappearance. Back at his penthouse, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He sat in front of his computer, reviewing every piece of information he had gathered so far. It was clear that the only way to get to the truth was to earn Jennifer's trust, something that wouldn't happen overnight. The following week was marked by a palpable tension between Jonathan and Jennifer. She could sense his lingering presence, like a shadow always nearby, yet she couldn't fully grasp why he seemed so interested in her past. Meanwhile, Jonathan struggled to maintain his patience. He knew he couldn't push Jennifer too hard, but the need for answers gnawed at him relentlessly. One afternoon, as Jennifer was leaving the rehabilitation center, Jonathan caught up with her in the parking lot. "Jennifer, do you have a moment?" he asked, trying to sound casual despite the urgency in his tone. She paused, sensing there was something important he needed to say. "Sure, Mr. Miller," she replied. "What's on your mind?" Jonathan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I feel like I've been invasive lately, asking about your personal life. I want to apologize if I made you uncomfortable." It's just that your story, your background, it interests me. It's rare to meet someone as dedicated as you are." Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but her wariness didn't completely fade. "I appreciate that," she said carefully, "but I'm still not sure why my past matters so much to you." Jonathan looked away for a moment, trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke with an unexpected vulnerability. "Years ago, my daughter, Lily, disappeared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was wearing a necklace just like yours when she vanished. Seeing it on you, it stirred something in me. I need to understand if there's any connection." Jennifer's eyes widened with shock. She instinctively reached for her pendant, clutching it tightly as if to protect it from the sudden revelation. "Your daughter, she disappeared?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief and a hint of fear. Jonathan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with raw pain. "Yes, it's been 5 years, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. When I saw that necklace, I felt a spark of hope that I haven't felt in a long time." Jennifer was taken aback, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, sympathy, and an underlying sense of dread. She struggled to find the right words. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. I had no idea, but I don't know how my necklace could be related. It was just given to me by my grandmother. I never imagined it might be connected to something so tragic." Jonathan's gaze intensified, but he softened his voice. "I understand, and I'm not accusing you of anything, Jennifer. But if there's even a small chance that this could lead me to Lily, I have to pursue it. Will you help me?" Jennifer hesitated, feeling torn. On one hand, she understood Jonathan's desperation. On the other, her own past was a closed book, filled with blanks she never wanted to revisit. "I want to help, but I'm not sure how I can," she admitted. "I really don't know much about my origins." The sincerity in Jennifer's voice convinced Jonathan to try a different approach. "Would you be willing to let me speak to your grandmother? Maybe she knows more than she shared with you." Jennifer's heart sank at the thought. Her grandmother had always been evasive about her past, and she feared the confrontation that might follow. "I don't know if she'll agree to talk," she said slowly. "She's very protective of me, and she's kept a lot of things hidden, probably for a reason." Jonathan sensed her reluctance, but remained determined. "I understand, but please think about it. If there's any chance that she knows something, it could make all the difference." Jennifer nodded reluctantly. "I'll try, but I can't make any promises. My grandmother is stubborn, and she doesn't trust easily." Later that evening, Jennifer sat alone in her small apartment, feeling the weight of the conversation with Jonathan. She thought back to the times she had asked her grandmother about the necklace in her early years. Alice had always dodged the questions, insisting that the past was best left forgotten. Now, with Jonathan's revelation about Lily, Jennifer couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The next day, Jennifer made a decision. She called Alice. "Grandma, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "It's about the necklace you gave me." Alice was silent for a moment before answering. "Why do you want to know about that old thing now?" she asked cautiously. Jennifer pressed on. "There's a man at the center, Jonathan Miller. His daughter disappeared years ago, and she was wearing a necklace just like mine. He thinks there might be a connection." Alice's voice became sharp. "Jennifer, you shouldn't get involved in this man's pain. It's not your place." "But Grandma, what if he's right? What if there is a connection? I can't just ignore it," Jennifer insisted, feeling an unusual sense of urgency. Alice's response was a mix of fear and frustration. "I've kept things from you for a reason, Jennifer. The world is not as safe as you think, and some secrets are dangerous. You're better off not knowing." Jennifer's heart raced as she listened to her grandmother's cryptic words. "Please, Grandma, I need to know the truth. Did you find me? Or did something else happen that you haven't told me?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of secrets. "Yes, Jennifer," Alice finally said, her voice barely audible. "I found you, alone and abandoned. But there was more to it than that, and I've kept it hidden to protect you." Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? Who left me there? Did you know them?" Alice's voice trembled as she replied, I saw a man that day, lurking in the shadows. He tried to take you back, but I managed to get you away before he could do anything. I've always feared they'd come for you again. Jennifer's mind reeled with this revelation. Who were they? Grandma? Why would someone want to take me? Alice's voice grew weaker. I don't know for sure, but I always suspected it had something to do with those people. People involved in terrible things. That's why I kept you hidden. Why I never let you ask too many questions. Jennifer was left speechless. Her entire life had been built on half-truths and hidden fears. Now, faced with Jonathan's quest for answers and her own unraveling past, she realized that the search for the truth had only just begun. Jonathan sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the transcript of his last conversation with Marcus. The details were grim. Children disappearing under mysterious circumstances, sometimes reappearing years later, but mostly never at all. His foundation had been tracing similar cases for years, but nothing had ever led to Lily. Now, the information about Jennifer's adoption and Alice's cryptic warnings suggested a chilling possibility. The necklace wasn't just a clue. It was a signpost leading toward a dark network Jonathan had encountered before. Jennifer, still reeling from her grandmother's revelations, tried to carry on with her daily routines at the center. But Jonathan's presence was harder to ignore than ever. Despite her doubts, she found herself agreeing to help him further. She knew now that her own story might hold the key to finding Lily, or even understanding her own murky past. Are you sure about this, Jennifer? Jonathan asked cautiously when she approached him in his office one morning. You've been through enough already. This could open up more pain than answers. Jennifer's voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the turmoil within. If there's even a chance that this is connected to your daughter, then we need to pursue it. I need to know what really happened to me, too. Jonathan nodded, appreciating her resolve. I'll need your help in revisiting some of the cases that the Foundation worked on around the time you were found. There's a pattern I'm beginning to see, but I need more pieces to put it together, Jennifer agreed, feeling a mix of dread and anticipation as she delved into files filled with missing children's faces, many of whom were never found. Each page carried the weight of unimaginable loss, yet Jonathan handled it with a strange mix of calm and intensity, an armor forged through years of pain. It became clear to Jennifer that Jonathan's quest for answers was more than professional. It was deeply personal, haunted by the ghost of his daughter. A breakthrough came when Marcus located a retired detective, Mike Harrison, who had been investigating child trafficking cases around the time Lily disappeared. He had retired abruptly after receiving threats, but his reports suggested that Lily's disappearance might have been linked to a well-organized network of traffickers. The details sent chills down Jonathan's spine, as he remembered the anonymous threats he had received back then, warning him to stop his search. The threats had been enough to make him pause, but not abandon his quest altogether. Jonathan arranged a meeting with Detective Harrison in a small, secluded diner on the outskirts of Manhattan. Jennifer insisted on coming along, feeling a deep need to understand this chapter of Jonathan's story. As they sat across from Harrison, the man's face was etched with years of regret and bitterness. I remember your daughter's case, Mr. Miller, Harrison began, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. It was one of the worst I ever worked on, but there was something bigger at play. We knew it then, but we couldn't prove it. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low and intense. What do you mean, something bigger? Harrison took a drag, his eyes clouded with old fears. There were whispers about a network, a group of powerful people involved in trafficking children for various purposes. It wasn't just random kidnappings. It was organized, calculated. We got close once, but the case fell apart after I got threats against my family. I had no choice but to back off. Jennifer's eyes widened as she listened, the horror of it all settling over her like a dark cloud. Is there any chance that I might have been involved somehow? Harrison studied her closely. It's possible. Your adoption records and Jonathan's daughter's case overlap in time and location. I wouldn't be surprised if the same people were involved. The implications were staggering. Jennifer, for the first time, considered the real possibility that her past was linked to a criminal network she had never known existed. Jonathan sensed her fear, but he was too focused to let it deter him. How do we find them now? he asked Harrison, his voice hard. The detective hesitated. These people are careful, well-connected. But there's one lead you might want to check, a safe house used by traffickers back then. It's an old, abandoned building in Brooklyn. If you're lucky, you might find records or clues there. As they left the diner, Jonathan felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. For the first time in years, he had a solid lead, but it also meant putting Jennifer directly in harm's way. "You don't have to come with me," he told her as they reached his car. "This could be dangerous." Jennifer's reply was resolute. "If this is connected to my past, then I need to be there. I can't run from it anymore." That night, Jonathan and Jennifer drove to the address Harrison had provided. The old building was dark and decrepit, with broken windows and faded graffiti covering its walls. It was the kind of place where terrible things could happen unseen, forgotten by the rest of the world. They moved cautiously, flashlights in hand. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of mold and decay. Jonathan felt a sense of déjà vu. He had visited many places like this during his search for Lily, each one a grim reminder of the world's darkest corners. As they explored the building, Jennifer stumbled upon a dusty filing cabinet in a back room. "Jonathan, over here," she called softly, her voice echoing in the emptiness. Jonathan rushed over, and together they pried open the rusted drawers. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs of children with missing posters attached, and records of transactions. Evidence of a network that had operated with chilling efficiency. But among the files, Jennifer found something that made her blood run cold. A record labeled Operation Lily. Jonathan's hands trembled as he picked up the file. "This was about her," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and hope. The file contained details of Lily's abduction, confirming that it had indeed been part of a broader trafficking scheme. Jennifer's heart ached as she watched Jonathan's face contort with pain. "We're getting closer," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll find her, Jonathan. We have to." But just as they were about to leave, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the other side of the building. Jonathan and Jennifer exchanged a glance of alarm, their instincts kicking in. "We need to get out now," Jonathan whispered urgently. They moved quickly and quietly, slipping through the darkness toward the exit. But as they reached the doorway, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man with a scar running down his face, his eyes cold and calculating. "What do we have here?" he sneered, blocking their way. Jonathan and Jennifer were caught, but Jonathan's resolve only hardened. "We're not leaving without answers," he declared, his voice steady despite the danger. The man's response was a sinister smile. "Be careful what you wish for," he said ominously. The tension was palpable as Jonathan and Jennifer stood frozen in the abandoned building, facing the scarred man blocking their escape. His sinister grin revealed that he was more than a simple henchman. He was someone who knew the inner workings of the trafficking network they had been pursuing. Jonathan took a cautious step forward, his voice measured but firm. "We're not here for trouble. We're looking for answers about the children who were taken, especially Lily Miller." The man's eyes flickered with a brief flash of recognition at the mention of Lily's name, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "You're in the wrong place for answers, old man," he sneered, though there was a hint of unease in his tone. Jonathan's patience was running thin. "If you know something about my daughter, I suggest you tell me now. I've waited 5 years to find her." The scarred man laughed, a dry, unsettling sound that echoed through the empty building. "You think you're the first to come here demanding answers? But you won't get any unless you have something to offer in return." Before Jonathan could respond, Jennifer stepped forward, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "What about me? Do you know anything about my past? I was abandoned years ago, and I need to know if it's connected to all of this." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied her. Then he spoke in a low, calculating tone. "You were one of them, weren't you? One of the children taken. But you got away somehow." "Interesting." Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, I was one of them? Who took me and why?" The man's grin faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "I don't have all the answers, girl, but I know enough to tell you this. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find." Sensing that they were outmatched and in increasing danger, Jonathan grabbed Jennifer's arm gently but firmly. "We need to leave," he whispered. "Now." They slowly backed away, keeping their eyes on the man until they reached the exit. Once outside, they ran to the car, adrenaline pumping through their veins. As they drove away, Jennifer felt tears welling up in her eyes. Tears of frustration, fear, and the overwhelming sense that her entire life had been a lie. Back at Jennifer's apartment later that night, they sat in heavy silence. Jonathan, still shaken by the encounter, finally broke the silence. "You need to speak to your grandmother again," he said. "She knows more than she's let on. She's been protecting you from something, and we need to understand what it is." Jennifer nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. I can't run from this anymore. I'll talk to her tomorrow." The next morning, Jennifer drove to her grandmother's house, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and desperation. Alice was waiting on the porch, her eyes weary, as if she had anticipated this visit. "Grandma, we need to talk," Jennifer said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. Alice nodded slowly, her face lined with resignation. "I thought this day would come eventually," she said quietly. "Come inside." Once inside, Jennifer didn't waste time. "I know you've been hiding things from me," she began, her voice both pleading and accusing. "I found out that I might have been part of something terrible, something involving trafficked children. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it." Alice's eyes filled with sadness and regret. "I never wanted you to know," she said, her voice breaking. "But I see now that I can't protect you any longer. You're right. You were taken as a child, part of a group of children trafficked by a network I was trying to expose. I found you abandoned, but I always feared that the people who took you would come back." Jennifer's mind raced as she tried to process this revelation. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why keep this from me all these years?" Alice looked away, her voice heavy with guilt. "I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, they would come for you again. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you hidden, but maybe I was wrong." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "You should have trusted me," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been living in the dark my whole life because of this." Alice reached out to take Jennifer's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "I know, and I'm sorry," she whispered. "But there's more you need to know. The man who tried to take you back when I found you, he was part of the network. I recognized him from my own investigations. That's why I never filed an official adoption, to keep your identity as hidden as possible." Jennifer's shock turned to anger. "Why didn't you report this to the authorities? Why didn't you try to bring them to justice?" Alice shook her head sadly. "I tried, Jennifer, but they were too powerful. Every time I got close, they found a way to block me or threaten me. I had to choose between your safety and the pursuit of justice, and I chose you." Jennifer felt a mixture of compassion and rage. She understood her grandmother's motivations, but the cost of those decisions had been too high. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. Alice's expression turned serious. "There's one last thing I can tell you," she said. "There was a man who helped me when I found you. He used to work within the network, but turned against them. His name is Victor, and he might have more answers. But be careful. He's dangerous, and he knows too much." Jennifer looked at her grandmother, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her shoulders. "I have to find him," she said simply. "It's the only way to end this." Back at Jonathan's office, Jennifer relayed everything her grandmother had told her. Jonathan listened intently, his face a mask of grim determination. "Victor," he repeated. "If he's still alive, he might be our only real lead." Jennifer nodded. "We need to find him, no matter the cost." Jonathan's eyes burned with the same fire that had driven him for years. "Then we find him," he said. "And this time, we don't stop until we uncover the truth." The search for Victor began immediately. Jonathan's network of contacts sprang into action, using every resource at their disposal. Jennifer, now more determined than ever, immersed herself in the investigation. She had to confront the dark truths of her past if there was any hope of bringing closure to Jonathan's relentless quest. Days turned into a week, and then finally, a lead came in. Marcus managed to track down Victor to a small, run-down apartment building on the outskirts of Queens. He had been living off the grid, moving frequently to avoid being caught by the remnants of the trafficking network that had once employed him. Jonathan and Jennifer arrived at the decrepit building one rainy afternoon. They climbed the narrow, dimly lit staircase, each step creaking under the weight of anticipation. Jonathan knocked on the door of apartment 3C, his knuckles loud in the otherwise silent hallway. After a moment of tense waiting, the door cracked open, revealing an older man with hollow eyes and a scruffy beard. "Who are you, and what do you want?" Victor demanded, his voice wary and tinged with paranoia. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice steady but urgent. "My name is Jonathan Miller. This is Jennifer Hayes. We were told you might have information about the trafficking network, specifically about my daughter, Lily, who was taken 5 years ago." Victor's face hardened at the mention of the network, but he seemed to study Jennifer more closely, his eyes narrowing. "You," he said slowly, "you look familiar. I think I remember you from back then." Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. "You remember me?" she asked, her voice filled with both hope and fear. Victor nodded reluctantly. "Yes, you were one of the children they took, but you were special. They called you the lost one because you disappeared from their custody. Your case caused quite a stir, and they were desperate to find you again." Jennifer felt a surge of emotions, confusion, anger, and a strange sense of vindication. "Why was I taken? What did they want with me?" Victor hesitated, as if weighing whether he should reveal the full truth. The network had different purposes for the children they took, he began cautiously. Some were sold, others were used as leverage against powerful families. You, however, were a high-value target, though I never learned why. But I suspect it had something to do with your family's connections. Jonathan, who had been silently absorbing every word, finally spoke up, his voice heavy. "Was my daughter taken for the same reasons?" Victor looked at Jonathan, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Yes, Lily was taken because of who you are, Mr. Miller. Your wealth, your influence. She was meant to be used against you. But things didn't go as planned. You caused too much noise, too much attention. So they had to move her quickly, and that's when the trail went cold." Jonathan's face was etched with pain, but he wasn't surprised. It was the answer he had dreaded, but expected all along. "Is there any chance she's still alive?" he asked, his voice cracking. Victor sighed deeply. "I don't know. Many of the children were moved out of the country, but some were kept hidden, moved from place to place. It's possible that Lily survived, but I can't guarantee it." Jennifer felt Jonathan's pain as if it were her own. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll find her, Jonathan," she said softly. "We can't stop now." Victor, seeing their determination, seemed to relent. "There is one last place you could check," he offered. "An old house in the outskirts of Jersey City. It was one of their main hideouts, used to store documents and records. If there's anything left, it might be there." That night, Jonathan and Jennifer drove to Jersey City, the rain pouring down in sheets as they approached the abandoned house. It was a crumbling, 2-story structure surrounded by overgrown grass and a broken fence. They felt a sense of foreboding as they stepped out of the car, but neither could afford to let fear stop them. Inside, the house was dark, cold, and filled with the remnants of a place once used for sinister purposes. They searched through the dust-covered rooms, finding old toys, forgotten belongings, and eerie silence. Jennifer's eyes were drawn to a small bedroom at the back of the house, where faded drawings were taped to the walls, evidence of children who had once lived there, if only briefly. Jonathan found a locked cabinet in a corner of the room. Using a crowbar, he pried it open. Inside were folders, each labeled with the names of children, their photographs, and chillingly detailed records of their captures. Jonathan's hands trembled as he searched through the files, desperately looking for Lily's name. Finally, Jennifer gasped. "Jonathan, look." He turned to see her holding a faded photograph of a little girl, her wide eyes filled with fear but unmistakably familiar. It was Lily, wearing the same silver heart necklace. Next to the photograph was a handwritten note. "Relocate immediately. High risk." Jonathan's vision blurred with tears. "She was here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They had her here." Jennifer's heart ached as she looked at the photo. "We're closer than ever," she said, her voice filled with both sadness and determination. "We need to keep going." But just as they began to collect the documents, they heard a noise, a car pulling up outside. Panic surged through them as they realized they were not alone. "We have to get out now," Jonathan urged. They made their way to the back door, clutching the files tightly. As they slipped into the darkness, Jennifer looked back one last time at the house, feeling a strange sense of finality. This place had held a piece of her past and Jonathan's pain, but it also held the key to their next steps. Back in the car, Jonathan drove in silence, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "We're closer, Jennifer," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "We'll find her. I won't stop until we do." Jennifer nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "Neither will I," she replied. "We'll do this together." But in the back of her mind, she knew that finding Lily was only part of the story. The truth about her own past was still unraveling, and with every answer came more questions. Questions that could redefine everything she thought she knew about herself. The drive back from Jersey City was heavy with unspoken words. The discovery of Lily's photo had reignited Jonathan's hope, but also deepened the anguish of knowing how close she had been, only to slip through his fingers again. Jennifer, meanwhile, was grappling with her own revelations. The evidence they found had confirmed she was indeed part of the trafficking network's operations, making her history not just an accident, but an orchestrated tragedy. In the following days, Jonathan and Jennifer continued their investigation, sorting through the files they had retrieved from the abandoned house. Among the documents, they found crucial information: the names of handlers, old contacts, and locations used by the network. But one name stood out: Vincent Moretti, a man with ties to organized crime and a notorious reputation as one of the ringleaders behind the network. Moretti had been off the radar for years, presumed either dead or hiding abroad. But according to the files, he had been seen recently near the outskirts of New York City, operating under a different name. This was their best lead yet, and it wasn't lost on either Jonathan or Jennifer that confronting him might be their only chance to uncover the truth about Lily's whereabouts. "Are you sure about this?" Jennifer asked Jonathan as they prepared to leave for Moretti's last known location. "We're walking straight into danger." Jonathan's response was resolute, his eyes filled with steely determination. "If this leads us to Lily, then it's worth every risk. I've come too far to turn back now." The location was a rundown warehouse in a desolate industrial district. The place reeked of decay, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. It was the kind of place where secrets were buried, both literally and figuratively. Jonathan and Jennifer approached cautiously, their senses heightened by the knowledge that this could be a trap. They entered the warehouse quietly, moving through the dimly lit corridors. As they reached the center of the building, they were met with a chilling sight. Several men, all armed, stood around a makeshift office where Vincent Moretti sat, leaning back in a chair with a knowing smile. Well, Moretti drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who's come knocking." "The desperate father and the lost girl." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with intensity. "I want to know where Lily is. Now." Moretti's smile widened, a mixture of amusement and cruelty in his eyes. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. But persistence doesn't always get you what you want." Jennifer, unable to contain her anger, spoke up. "What about me? You know who I am, don't you?" Moretti's gaze shifted to her, his expression becoming more calculating. "Ah, yes. You're the one who slipped away. They called you the one who got lost, a real thorn in their side back then. But I always wondered if you'd find your way back." Jonathan's patience was wearing thin. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded again, his voice louder this time. "I know you were involved in taking her." Moretti's eyes gleamed with dark delight. "You're right, Miller. Your little girl was a prime target, valuable leverage against you. But things got messy, and she had to be moved quickly. I don't know where she is now, but I do know that she's alive. For now." Jennifer's heart clenched at the implication, and Jonathan's face paled. "What do you mean, for now?" he asked, his voice filled with barely contained rage. Moretti leaned forward, his tone casual but menacing. "These things don't come without a cost. You keep pushing, and you might find her, but it won't be pretty." Some things are better left buried, Miller. Jennifer felt a surge of defiance. We're not stopping until we find her, she said, her voice steady. And you can't scare us into walking away. Moretti's smile faded, replaced by a look of irritation. You two are more trouble than you're worth, he muttered. Then, with a sudden movement, he gestured to his men. Take care of them, he ordered coldly. The room erupted into chaos as Jonathan and Jennifer tried to make a break for it. Shots rang out, echoing off the warehouse walls. Jonathan pulled Jennifer behind a stack of crates, his breathing ragged as they took cover. We need to get out of here, he whispered urgently. Jennifer nodded, her adrenaline pumping. There's a side door, she pointed, her eyes scanning for a clear path. They made a desperate dash toward the exit, dodging bullets as Moretti's men closed in. Jonathan returned fire with a small handgun he had concealed earlier, managing to hold them off long enough for Jennifer to reach the door. Just as they were about to escape, Moretti appeared behind them, a gun aimed directly at Jonathan. Stop right there, Miller, he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. This ends now. Jennifer, acting on pure instinct, lunged at Moretti, knocking his arm aside just as the gun fired. The bullet missed Jonathan by inches, ricocheting off the metal doorframe. In the confusion, Jonathan tackled Moretti to the ground, his fury unleashed. Where is she? He yelled, his hands gripping Moretti's collar. Tell me where she is. Moretti struggled beneath Jonathan's weight, a twisted grin still on his face. You'll never find her, he taunted, his voice hoarse. She's beyond your reach now. Jennifer pulled Jonathan off Moretti, her voice urgent. We have to go, Jonathan. Now. Reluctantly, Jonathan let go, knowing that staying any longer would be suicide. They ran through the side door and into the night, the rain pouring down as they reached the car. As they sped away, Jonathan's face was a mix of anger, despair, and grim determination. Back at Jonathan's penthouse, they regrouped, their clothes soaked and their minds exhausted. Jonathan paced the room, his fists clenched. He knows more, he muttered. I'm sure of it. But we've rattled him, Jennifer. We're getting closer. Jennifer nodded, wiping rain and tears from her face. We have to keep pushing, she agreed. But we need a different strategy. He's not going to give up anything willingly. Just then, Jonathan's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I've got something, Marcus said urgently over the line. I tracked a recent financial transaction tied to Moretti, an off-the-books payment for a property rental upstate. It's remote, isolated, and matches the kind of location they've used before. Jonathan's eyes lit up with renewed hope. This could be it, he whispered to Jennifer. This could be where they're keeping Lily. Jennifer's heart raced. Then let's go, she said. It's time to bring her home. The drive upstate was filled with a tense, electric silence. The remote location Marcus had uncovered was miles from civilization. A small cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was the kind of place where secrets could be kept hidden indefinitely. Jonathan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind consumed by the possibility that this could finally be the end of his torment. Are you ready for this? Jennifer asked quietly from the passenger seat, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. Jonathan's eyes never left the road. I've been ready for 5 years, he replied, his voice raw. But I don't think I'll believe it until I see her. The cabin came into view, barely visible through the dense trees. They parked a safe distance away and approached cautiously, moving silently through the underbrush. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest, each step filled with a mix of hope and dread. He was terrified of what he might find, or not find, inside. As they reached the cabin, Jonathan signaled to Jennifer to stay behind while he peered through a window. Inside, he saw a figure sitting on a small bed, her back to the window. His heart nearly stopped as he recognized the long brown hair, the way she held herself. It was Lily. Without a moment's hesitation, Jonathan burst through the door, shouting, "Lily!" His voice was filled with years of longing, pain, and desperate hope. The girl turned, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. She looked older, her features sharper than he remembered, but there was no mistaking the face of his daughter. "Dad?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. as if she were afraid to believe what she was seeing. Jonathan fell to his knees in front of her, tears streaming down his face. "It's me, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "It's really me." Lily hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether this was real, but then she rushed into Jonathan's arms, burying her face in his shoulder. "I thought you'd never come," she sobbed. Jonathan held her tightly, his own tears mingling with hers. "I'm here now," he whispered, "and I'm never letting you go again." Jennifer stood in the doorway, her heart filled with both joy and bittersweet sadness. She watched as father and daughter reunited, feeling a sense of closure but also a strange emptiness inside. This journey had been about more than finding Lily. It had been about finding herself, too. But the reunion was not without its complications. As Lily and Jonathan tried to make sense of the situation, Lily revealed that she had been moved frequently, kept hidden to prevent anyone from finding her. The people who had taken her were part of a powerful network that extended beyond borders, and she had been treated as a bargaining chip, held in reserve should Jonathan's relentless pursuit ever come too close to uncovering the truth. Jennifer stepped forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Lily, do you know if there are others still being held? Children like you?" Lily nodded slowly, tears still glistening in her eyes. "Yes, there are others. I don't know how many, but they're out there. They told me that as long as I stayed quiet, they wouldn't hurt them." Jonathan's face darkened with resolve. "We're going to stop them, Lily," he vowed. "We're going to bring every one of those children home." Suddenly, the sound of a car engine roared in the distance. Jennifer's eyes widened as she looked outside. "We have to leave now," she urged. "They're coming back." Jonathan scooped Lily into his arms, and the three of them rushed out the back door, disappearing into the woods. They ran through the dense underbrush, their breaths coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Behind them, they could hear the voices of men shouting angrily, their footsteps drawing closer. As they reached the car, Jonathan threw open the door and helped Lily inside. Jennifer jumped into the driver's seat, turning the ignition with shaking hands. The car roared to life, and they sped away, the tires skidding on the gravel road. Shots rang out behind them, but they kept moving, the sound of gunfire fading as they put distance between themselves and the cabin. Hours later, they reached safety at a secure location arranged by Marcus. Jonathan held Lily close, refusing to let go. "You're safe now," he kept repeating, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. "No one will ever hurt you again." Lily, still processing everything, looked up at Jennifer, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. Jennifer knelt down, her voice soft but steady. "You're welcome, Lily. You're very brave, and we're so glad you're safe." Over the following weeks, Jonathan and Lily began the slow process of healing. The scars of the past would never fully disappear, but they had each other now, and that was enough to start rebuilding. The foundation, too, shifted its focus. Jonathan was more driven than ever to dismantle the network that had stolen his daughter and so many others. Jennifer stayed by his side, helping to coordinate efforts and using her own story to inspire others to come forward and help the fight. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Jonathan and Lily stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the lights of New York twinkle below. Lily leaned her head on Jonathan's shoulder, her voice filled with a newfound sense of hope. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonathan wrapped his arm around her, his voice firm but gentle. "Now, we start over," he said. "Together." Inside, Jennifer watched from a distance, a soft smile on her face. She knew her journey wasn't over. There were still unanswered questions about her own past and children still missing who needed to be found. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The nightmare that had begun with Lily's disappearance was over. A new chapter awaited, one filled with healing, justice, and a promise that they would never stop fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The story of Jonathan, Jennifer, and Lily was far from simple, but it was a story of hope rekindled, of bonds restored, and of a future finally within reach. They were not the same people who had begun this journey, but they were stronger, united by a past filled with pain and a future filled with purpose. A year had passed since the rescue of Lily. The journey had not been easy, filled with legal battles, grueling therapy sessions, and the constant challenge of rebuilding lives broken by the horrors of the past. But through it all, Jonathan, Jennifer, and Lily had found strength in one another, forming an unbreakable bond forged by pain and perseverance. The once fragmented pieces of their lives were slowly coming together, like a mosaic created from shards of shattered glass, imperfect, yet more beautiful because of the resilience it represented. Jonathan had shifted the focus of the Miller Foundation in a profound way. No longer simply an organization dedicated to finding missing children, it had become a force of advocacy, shining a light on the dark underworld of child trafficking. It now collaborated with international agencies, pushing for stricter laws, faster intervention, and deeper investigations. The public had rallied behind the foundation, inspired by Jonathan's unwavering commitment and the deeply personal story of his daughter's miraculous return. Today was a special day, marking the grand opening of the foundation's new headquarters in Manhattan. The building, a tall and modern structure, was a beacon of hope amid the city's bustling landscape. At the top, the Miller logo glimmered under the sunlight, symbolizing the promise of safety and sanctuary for all lost children. Inside, a press conference was underway, the main hall filled with reporters, supporters, and former victims who had found a voice through the foundation. At the center of the stage stood Jonathan, with Lily by his side. Dressed in a simple blue dress, Lily looked older than her 13 years. Her eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had seen too much but refused to be defined by it. Jonathan's voice boomed over the microphone, carrying both the weight of past sorrows and the fervor of renewed purpose. Today is not just about what we've accomplished. It's about what we're still fighting for, he declared. Lily's story has shown us that we can find light even in the deepest darkness. But there are thousands more who still wait, children who have been taken, abandoned, or simply forgotten. We won't stop until every last one of them is safe. The crowd erupted into applause, and as the noise settled, Lily stepped forward. It was the first time she had chosen to speak publicly about her ordeal. Her voice, though soft, was strong and clear. "I was lost for so long," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But I never lost hope, not completely. I always believed my father would find me, no matter what. And he did. I want every child to know that they're not alone, that there are people who will fight for them, just like my dad fought for me." Tears filled Jonathan's eyes as he looked at his daughter, a mixture of pride and a lingering sadness for the years they had lost. But there was no doubt in his mind that their bond was stronger now than ever. He reached out and hugged Lily tightly, knowing that this moment, like many before it, was one of victory, not just over those who had taken her, but over the darkness that had tried to consume them both. Amid the celebration, Jennifer watched from a few steps back, a bittersweet smile on her face. Her own life had taken a transformative turn. No longer just a survivor or a witness, she had become a driving force within the foundation, advocating for victims and sharing her story as a way to inspire others. She had grown close to Lily, becoming not only a friend but a mentor, someone who understood the scars that didn't always show on the surface. After the press event concluded, Jonathan, Jennifer, and Lily stood together in the private office of the new building, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. "This is only the beginning," Jonathan said quietly, looking out the window at the city below. "We've made progress, but there's so much more to be done." Jennifer nodded, her voice filled with determination. "We're making a difference, Jonathan. Every child we find, every family we reunite, it's one more victory." Lily, standing between them, glanced up at both adults. "I want to help too," she said with conviction. "I don't want to just be the girl who was found. I want to be the one who helps others find their way back, too." Jonathan's heart swelled with pride. "You already are, Lily," he assured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've given hope to so many people just by being here, by being brave enough to share your story." Jennifer watched the father and daughter, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about finding Lily or unraveling the mysteries of her own past anymore. It was about healing, about showing others that no matter how broken things seemed, it was always possible to rebuild. But there were still lingering questions about Jennifer's origins. Despite everything they had discovered, the full story of her past remained elusive. Jennifer had started her own search, using the resources of the foundation to uncover more about her early years and the network that had once trafficked her. She knew that confronting her own history was essential not just for closure, but for understanding how to dismantle the network that had tried to destroy her and countless others like her. One evening, a few weeks after the grand opening, Jennifer received a phone call that sent chills down her spine. It was from Victor, the informant who had initially guided them to the cabin where Lily was found. His voice was urgent, filled with an unexpected urgency. "I found something," he said. "Something about your family, Jennifer. It's not what you think." Jennifer's heart raced as she listened to Victor's cryptic words. "What do you mean? What have you found?" Victor's reply was brief but clear. "Meet me tomorrow at the old diner on 8th Avenue. You need to see this in person." Jennifer hung up, a mix of anxiety and anticipation coursing through her. She knew this was another step toward understanding who she truly was and why she had been taken all those years ago. The following morning, Jonathan noticed Jennifer's restlessness as they prepared for another day of work at the foundation. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone filled with genuine concern. Jennifer hesitated for a moment, then decided to share the truth. "I got a call from Victor," she admitted. "He says he has information about my past, something I need to know." Jonathan's eyes softened with understanding. "You've been through so much already, Jennifer. But if this is something you need to do, I'll support you." Jennifer nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Jonathan. I wouldn't have come this far without you and Lily." Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Whatever you find, remember that you're not alone. We're a family now, and we'll face whatever comes next together." As Jennifer left for the meeting with Victor, she carried with her not only a determination to uncover the truth, but also a deep sense of belonging she had never known before. The journey had begun with the search for Lily, but it had led to something much greater. A new family bound not by blood, but by shared scars, healing, and an unbreakable promise to protect others from suffering the same fate. The darkness they had faced was real, but so was the light they had found. And as they moved forward, Jonathan, Jennifer, and Lily were united by a single, unwavering belief that hope could be reborn even in the darkest of places.